There's magic in a garden, never more so when it awakens in spring. First snowdrops, then crocus poking from the soil. Every day I check to see what's appearing in my flower beds. So far nothing. Although I did get excited at a splash of yellow the other day, but it turned out to be a candy wrapper. Besides magic in the garden, there's myth. In fact, there's too many myths and too much misinformation floating around, mainly due to the ease of the internet. Today we'll look at a few cases. One of the myths I find floating around the internet is starting seedlings in eggshells. They're cute, they're fun, but there are problems associated with it. There's not enough soil. By the time the seedling gets any bigger, it will be drying out constantly. It'll be a hard time keeping the plant going. The other thing suggested is that when you plant it in the ground, the eggshell will decompose. Well, it will, but it takes a long time. And it's also said that as the eggshell decomposes in the soil, it adds calcium to the soil. Useful for tomatoes, because calcium, when it's deficient in the soil, can lead to blossom end rot. Except that isn't quite true. The problem is not with a deficiency of calcium in the soil, it's a problem within the tomato plant, according to research that transfers the calcium through the plant. So if you want to grow seedlings in eggshells, at least crack the eggshell when you plant it. While we're talking about nutrients for tomatoes, here's another myth that's been around forever. That's adding Epsom salts to the planting hole. It's said to make the tomatoes sweeter. Rose growers use it, makes their roses, I don't know, smell better. But really, what is Epsom salts? It is magnesium sulfate, and it is a micronutrient for plants, but it's rarely deficient in soil. The only place it would be deficient is on extremely sandy soils where crops have been grown intensively. But typical garden soil, the average garden soil around here for sure, there is no deficiency of magnesium. And interesting to note, you never see it listed as a micronutrient on fertilizer. How about that? So I say, save the Epsom salts for the bathtub. It's said to relieve aches and pains. Or is that a myth? Here's another biodegradable container typically used for starting seedlings. These are great. They do decompose in the soil. The concern I have is that when you're growing it indoors and you're fertilizing regularly, when you plant it in the soil in the garden, there may be a tendency to forget about it. By the time it's exhausted the nutrients inside the container, it may not have penetrated the soil with the roots. So I'd be cautious about that. If it's my preference, I would remove it. You could at least cut the bottom off when planting it. The other thing is, it depends a little bit on the vigorousness of the roots and also the soil conditions. Dry soil, it will not break down very quickly. Another typical common biodegradable little container is these little peat pellets. They expand when wet, but the fabric that surrounds them is not biodegradable. It's actually a plastic material of some kind, and you can test this. If you strip it off, dry it and put a match to it, you will find it shrivels up just like nylon. The solution is, when you come to plant them, just slice it and carefully peel it off, and you probably have a more successful plant. One of the oldest garden myths around is adding gravel to the bottom of the container. I'm really not sure why. Well, I am. All you really need is a nice, free-draining potting soil. It won't run out through the holes at the bottom. So what happens when you water a plant? Well, let's imagine this is the soil in your container. Container is this deep. When you water it, initially there is some excess will flow out of the bottom, but this area here will not transfer to gravel. It will act like a perched water table. It'll be wet down here, more moist up here. That's where the roots are. If the roots were in the wet area, they would rot. So what happens when you fill a pot with gravel in the bottom? All you've done is reduce the soil depth, but now the roots are going to be in the rotting area. Not good for the plants at all. So forget all about putting gravel in the bottom of a container. The important thing is it can drain. One problem is if you sit a container like this on a deck or a patio, you're effectively sealing the holes in the bottom. So all I do is I take 3 or 4 pebbles and I put them around the bottom just so that it raises the pot 1/4 of an inch off the surface, and then it can drain just as freely as it likes. So scramble the eggs, put the Epsom salts in the bathtub when you come in from the garden. And as for the gravel, spread it on the surface of the soil in your containers and it will act as a mulch. Any questions, email me at garden@gto.net. I'm David Hobson for therecord.com.